It is strange how quickly a wanted thing can become ordinary. For days or months, a mind can lean toward it as if life will change texture the moment it arrives. Then it arrives. There is brightness for a little while. Relief, too. A gap closes. And then, almost quietly, the mind starts moving again. One more condition. One more improvement. One more reassurance. One more proof that things are finally where they should be. The object was real. The relief was real. But the rest did not last. That is the difficulty I want to stay with tonight. Not because wanting is shameful, and not because the answer is to train ourselves into a smaller life. The deeper problem is harder to hear. Desire does not only point toward objects. Very often it decides what counts as enough, what counts as success, what counts as safety, what counts as peace. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this with unusual severity. Yet Epicurus, Buddhist thought, and Stoicism do not simply repeat him. They argue with him, correct him, and keep alive a different possibility. So let me put the promise plainly before we go any further. By the end of tonight, I want to leave you with a clearer sense of why getting what we want so often fails to settle wanting itself, and why freedom may depend less on satisfying desire than on changing the authority we give it. If you enjoy thinking through questions like this with me, subscribing to the channel helps others find them too. Sharing the video helps even more. Let's begin. There is a small silence that follows attainment. It is easy to miss because it does not last long. A person works towards something, imagines it repeatedly, arranges a dozen private scenes around it, and then at last it happens. The message arrives, the door opens, the purchase is made. The recognition comes. For a brief moment, the inner weather changes, the body loosens, the mind brightens. The strain that had been gathering behind the object releases itself. Most of us would call that satisfaction, and in one honest sense it is. It would be dishonest to deny the sweetness of fulfilled desire. Philosophy begins only when that sweetness fades fast enough to expose a deeper pattern. The deeper pattern is not merely greed, it is not always vanity, it is not even always excess. Sometimes the wanted thing is ordinary and decent. Food when one is hungry, shelter when one is unsettled. A human reply after a long uncertainty. The point is not that all desire is corrupt. The point is that desire often survives its own satisfaction. Relief arrives, and before life has fully received it, some part of the mind is already leaning again. It wonders whether this will last. It imagines the next improvement. It compares the present gain to some more complete version of it. The object is present, but the structure of wanting has not been dismissed from the room. That is why simple moral language can feel too thin here. If the whole problem were bad taste, poor discipline, or gluttonous personality, the pattern would be easier to solve. We could scold it, we could reform it, we could sort better from worse and be done. Yet the return of wanting often appears even when a person is trying to be reasonable. The promotion comes, and the mind begins measuring the next rung. A house is secured, and now its insufficiencies become visible. Love is returned, and fear enters with it. Rest is obtained, and it starts asking to be preserved. The more carefully one looks, the less this resembles a single vice, and the more it resembles a rhythm. A rhythm has a different meaning from an appetite. An appetite may be finite. It points somewhere, reaches there, and then falls quiet. A rhythm organizes time. It gives shape to anticipation, acquisition, and aftermath. That is what desire often does to a human life. It teaches the future to look charged and the present to look partial. It tells the mind where fullness is supposed to arrive. Then, once the moment has arrived, it quietly redraws the horizon. This is why a person can seem fortunate from the outside and still feel unclosed from within. The object has changed hands, the structure has remained. It helps to slow the sequence down. Before the object arrives, the imagination works ahead of reality. It gives the object atmosphere. It lends it a larger promise than the object alone could carry. The desired thing is no longer merely a thing. It begins to stand for relief, completion, legitimacy, certainty, belonging, peace. Then the object arrives in the ordinary world, which means it arrives among limits. The phone call is real, but so are the next obligations. The new position is real, but so is the same old self standing inside it. The relationship is real, but so are fear, habit, and time. The object cannot bear the whole dream because the dream had already asked it to do more than any finite event can do. This is where many people start reaching for familiar explanations. Maybe the problem is consumer culture. Maybe the problem is ambition. Maybe the problem is simply that modern life overstimulates desire. Those explanations can illuminate parts of the picture, but they are not large enough for the whole pressure. The return of wanting is older than shopping, older than screens, older than advertising, older than the current vocabulary of habit and compulsion. It belongs to hunger, love, rivalry, grief, status, safety, and self-regard. A person can live modestly and still be governed by the same pattern. A person can renounce luxury and still make peace, purity, or holiness into the next impossible object. That is why philosophy enters here at all. Ordinary language tells us that we want things. It does not always tell us what wanting is doing to the rest of life while it is pursuing them. It does not tell us why satisfaction can feel so brief, or why getting what was wanted can expose a new emptiness instead of final rest. It does not tell us why some people begin to suspect that the mind loves movement more than arrival, or why relief can start changing back into lack almost before we have named the relief. Once the pattern is seen, advice feels premature. The issue is not only behavioral, it is structural. Schopenhauer will soon give that structure a severe name. Before he does, it is worth staying one moment longer with the simple scene itself. Think of a late evening after a difficult stretch, when one concrete uncertainty has finally resolved. Something is easier now than it was yesterday. Yet instead of simple rest, another calculation begins. Can this be kept? Was it enough? What else must be repaired before one is finally entitled to settle? The strange part is not that the mind has new work. The strange part is that it cannot easily trust fulfillment to remain fulfillment. It converts arrival into a threshold. It reopens the future. This does not mean joy is fake. It does not mean achievement is empty. It does not mean longing is always a mistake. The point is smaller and more unsettling. Desire has a way of teaching us that each fulfillment is provisional. Even when the object is good, even when the relief is deserved, the deeper movement often persists. The hand releases one thing and reaches for the next. The mind leaves one lack and begins organizing itself around another. That quiet recurrence is why the subject of desire belongs to philosophy rather than only to discipline or manners. By the time we notice it, the pattern has already told us something. It has told us that wanting may not be exhausted by the object it names. It has told us that satisfaction may fail because the object was never the whole issue. It has told us that the promise attached to desire might be larger than any single attainment could carry. Once that suspicion appears, the scene stops being a private embarrassment and becomes a clue. The cycle knows more than our excuses do. It knows that something in wanting keeps reopening life after each apparent close. It helps to see how broad this can be. A person spends years imagining that one practical condition will finally allow life to begin properly. Once the debt is smaller, once the home is secure, once the child is old enough, once the work is recognized, once the body is stronger, once the beloved person finally says yes, then the condition arrives, or partly arrives, and the soul discovers that relief quickly turns into stewardship. What had seemed like an answer becomes another territory to guard. The secured home must now be maintained. The longed-for love must now be protected from loss. The achieved position must now be justified. Even recovery of health can bring with it a new vigilance, a fear of recurrence, a desire to lock the body into permanent obedience. The more necessary the good, the easier it is for desire to turn gratitude into management. Once this is seen, the return of wanting no longer looks like a weird personal defect. It looks like a structural temptation built into how human beings live with time. We are creatures of anticipation. We project ourselves into the future and recruit objects into that projection. We keep trying to settle tomorrow in advance. Desire is one of the main ways we attempt it. The cycle reopens because tomorrow never stops being tomorrow. Each attained good enters time. It does not cancel time. It does not end contingency. It does not stop the mind from imagining the next missing support. This is why desire so easily becomes a theory of life rather than a mood. It tells us where completion will be, and then it keeps moving the place. When we say that we want something, we usually speak as if the sentence were plain. I want the position, I want the person, I want the house, the answer, the trip, the praise, the security. The sentence sounds clean because the object is clear, yet desire is rarely satisfied with naming an object alone. Hidden inside the object there is often another promise, one large enough to change the meaning of the whole pursuit. A person says they want success, but what success secretly carries is the fantasy of rest from doubt. A person says they want to be loved, but what the desire begins borrowing is safety from loneliness, or the final confirmation that they are finally enough to be kept. A person says they want money, and what money quietly starts carrying is freedom from humiliation, dependence, contingency, vulnerability. The object matters. It would be childish to deny that. The job is not the same as the fantasy attached to it, but the job is still real. Love is real. Security is real. Material ease is real. Desire does not become philosophically interesting by proving that objects do not matter. It becomes philosophically interesting because the object is often made to carry more than itself. It becomes a vessel for closure. It becomes a carrier of enoughness. It begins to whisper that if this arrives, ordinary life will stop feeling provisional. That whisper is powerful because it is not completely irrational. Sometimes life genuinely does become more bearable when one condition improves. The mistake is not always that we expect too much from what we want. Sometimes the expectation is partly earned. Safety really can reduce fear. Friendship really can reduce isolation. Food really can answer hunger. Relief really can be relief. If desire were always delusional, it would hold less power than it does. What makes it dangerous is that it uses real goods as occasions for larger fantasies. It takes one honest need and stretches it into a total promise. This is why disappointment can feel so much larger than the object itself. Someone loses an opportunity and feels not only practical frustration but a collapse in worth. Someone is overlooked and feels not only annoyance but a deeper verdict on the self. Someone gains exactly what was wanted and still feels unsettled because the object arrived without the larger transformation it had been made to symbolize. Desire had smuggled in a second contract. The explicit contract concerned the object. The hidden contract concerned what life would finally feel like once the object was secured. Enoughness begins to move precisely there. Once desire starts carrying a hidden promise, the standard of satisfaction becomes unstable. The wanted thing may arrive, but if what was really being demanded was legitimacy, permanence, total reassurance, or immunity from future lack, then no finite object can end the movement. The attainment is real, yet it looks incomplete almost immediately. The mind is not merely ungrateful. It is measuring the event against a promise the event was never capable of fulfilling. That is why desire often expands after fulfillment instead of calming down. The first object fails to deliver the larger state. The mind does not always conclude that the larger state was impossible. More often it concludes that the object was insufficiently complete. Not that the promise was too large, but that the acquisition was too small. So it revises the object, a better version, a more final achievement, a purer love, a wider public, a safer bank account, a more admired self. Desire teaches the horizon to retreat while keeping faith with the same old promise. One reason this is difficult to see is that many of the hidden promises are socially reinforced. Entire forms of life encourage us to treat objects as carriers of inner settlement. Reputation is not offered as mere public description, it is offered as self-confirmation. Romance is not offered as companionship alone, it is offered as rescue from incompleteness. Ambition is not offered as one mode of work, it is offered as the visible proof that life has gone correctly. Status is not offered as one unstable relation among others, it is offered as insurance against insignificance. Under those conditions, desire does not simply respond to goods, it learns to speak in the language of salvation. Yet even here the issue is older and deeper than modern performance culture. The human mind has long been tempted to convert finite goods into total signs. A crown, a lover, a child, a field, a reputation, a god, a city, a doctrine, a piece of inheritance, a remembered victory, any of these can become the bearer of more than itself. That is why desire is not reducible to consumption. A person may reject luxury and still crave moral purity as if purity could finally settle their existence. Another may renounce worldly success and crave enlightenment in the same absolutizing way. The structure survives changes in costume. If the object is not the whole story, then desire is not simply hunger for possession. It is often hunger for a changed relation to life. It wants the future to stop threatening. It wants the self to stop wobbling. It wants contingency to stop humiliating us. It wants the ordinary instability of being human to be answered by some arrival. Once that is heard, the seriousness of philosophy comes into view. The problem is no longer how to resist temptation in a narrow moral sense. The problem is that wanting can become the mechanism by which life keeps declaring itself unfinished. There are honest objections here. Not every desire carries a total promise. Many wants are local, clear, and finite. A person can want tea, conversation, rest, medicine, ordinary ease. A person can love without treating love as a metaphysical cure. A person can work hard without imagining achievement as final redemption. Desire does not always overpromise. The question is why it so easily slides in that direction, and why the wants that organize the shape of a life so often come with hidden claims about peace, worth, and enough. To see that slide is already to understand something important. The object was never alone. It had been hired to carry a larger burden. Schopenhauer matters now because he refuses to treat this burden as an accidental distortion. He asks whether endless striving belongs to desire more deeply than our hopeful stories admit. He is the thinker who looks at this recurring overpromise and says that it is not a side effect. It may be the form of willing itself. That conclusion also explains why desire can migrate so easily from one object to another without losing its force. Once the larger promise has attached itself to the structure rather than to the particular thing, almost any object can be drafted into service. The ambitious person may become a moral perfectionist. The romantic may become a seeker of purity. The collector of praise may become a collector of insight. Outwardly, the life can change dramatically. Inwardly, the same hidden contract survives. Once this final condition is met, ordinary existence will stop feeling unfinished. Desire is powerful because it adapts. It can live inside worldly intensity, spiritual ambition, family devotion, artistic labor, even the wish to become less desirous. That adaptability is one reason philosophy cannot be satisfied with scolding particular objects. The objects change too quickly, the promise remains familiar. This is also why disappointment after a noble pursuit can feel so disorienting. A person expects the pain of disappointment only after foolish or superficial aims. Then they are wounded by the failure of a serious ambition, a serious love, a serious effort to become more honorable, and they do not understand why the wound goes so deep. Often it goes deep because the object was carrying more than practical significance. It had become a wager on whether life could finally stop feeling contingent. Once that hidden wager is named, desire starts looking less like a simple appetite and more like an interpreter of existence. One of Schopenhauer's most unsettling achievements is that he makes desire feel older than our reasons for it. Most of us experience wanting as though it were guided by explanation. We want this because it will help, because it is pleasant, because it is prudent, because it is beautiful, because it answers some need. Schopenhauer does not deny that reasons appear. He doubts that reasons stand at the beginning. Underneath our justifications, he sees a more basic pressure, something non-rational and restless that keeps leaping toward life in one form after another. He calls it will. The word can mislead because, in ordinary speech, will sounds like determination or deliberate resolve. That is not what he means. Schopenhauer's will is not disciplined intention. It is blind striving, a force of push and appetite, the inner pressure by which life keeps pressing onward. In his metaphysical picture, the world as it appears to us has this striving character at depth. That is one reason his writing still startles people who are not interested in metaphysics. He gives language to the feeling that wanting sometimes arrives before thought has finished explaining itself. A person tells a story about their motives afterward. The leaning forward often came first. This is where his severity becomes useful. Many softer accounts imply that dissatisfaction comes mainly from poor choices. Choose better, desire more wisely, moderate the excess, repair the social distortion, and the human problem will shrink to scale. Schopenhauer does not make it that easy. He looks at recurrence itself and hears something more radical. The object changes, the interior drive remains. One goal is attained, another rises. One need is answered, another takes its place. One love settles into possession and begins making room for fear, habit, or longing of another kind. The dissatisfaction is not merely around desire, it is in the very mode of a life structured by willing. That is why Schopenhauer cannot be reduced to the slogan that life is suffering. The slogan catches the shadow but not the movement. What matters in his account is the sequence. Wanting hurts because lack hurts. Fulfillment does not rescue us because fulfillment only suspends lack for a moment. Once the moment passes, willing resumes. In other words, desire is not simply one experience among others. It is a machinery of recurrence. The human being appears as a creature always being driven beyond each attained form. This makes everyday experience look different. Under a lighter moral psychology, disappointment after success may look like immaturity. Under Schopenhauer, it looks revelatory. The problem is not that a person fails to appreciate what they have. The problem is that what they have cannot quiet the engine that produced the wanting in the first place. Appreciation may soften the pain, it does not dissolve the structure. The object satisfied the latest expression of will, it did not end willing. There is a bleak democracy in that claim. It means restlessness is not reserved for the obviously vain or morally unserious. The poor and the rich can both find themselves driven by recurrence. The ambitious worker and the dutiful parent can both discover that one solved problem quickly reveals another horizon of need. Schopenhauer's point is not that all lives look identical from the inside. His point is that the cycle of pressing, attaining, and pressing again cuts across outward differences. A better biography does not automatically cancel the architecture of striving. There is something almost cruel in the honesty of that thought. It tells us that desire may use reason as an instrument rather than a master. We imagine ourselves choosing among ends with cool deliberation. Yet much of deliberation can become the after-service of a more basic push. This does not eliminate agency. Schopenhauer is not arguing that reflective life is meaningless. He is arguing that the reflective story does not always stand at the beginning. A person may believe they are freely organizing desire when, in fact, desire has already organized the field in which reasons now appear compelling. His metaphysical ambition should still be handled carefully. It would be too simple to say that Schopenhauer proved reality is will and left the rest of philosophy behind. Even those sympathetic to him have to keep a boundary here. He presents will as the thing in itself insofar as it appears to us in experience. That last phrase matters. He is not giving a laboratory report on the universe. He is offering an interpretation of what our striving condition reveals. This boundary does not weaken the existential force of the account. It keeps us from turning a dark philosophical vision into dogma. It also helps explain why Schopenhauer keeps sounding so concrete, even when his metaphysics is bold. He is not asking us to stare at abstractions floating above life. He is asking us to look at the repeated fact that willing outruns each of its satisfactions. The person who finally gets what they wanted and then feels the old push return has already met the phenomenon that interests him most. The metaphysical language is an attempt to honor that recurrence, not distract from it. Read that way, Schopenhauer remains severe without becoming mystical fog. It is important, too, that Schopenhauer does not frame this recurrence as a mere cultural accident. He is not saying only that capitalism, fashion, or vanity have made us difficult to satisfy, though he would hardly deny their power to inflame desire. He is saying something deeper and more disturbing. Even stripped of those amplifiers, a being structured by will would still be vulnerable to recurrence, because the problem lies in the forward-driving character of willing itself. That claim is what makes his philosophy feel so uncompromising. It removes the hope that better social decoration alone will cure the fundamental unrest. What gives that vision force is how well it illuminates ordinary recurrence. A person can know they should be content and still feel some old interior leaning continue. They can call the feeling irrational, childish, socially conditioned, sinful, or neurotic. Schopenhauer asks them to hear it as a clue to a deeper structure. The persistence of wanting is not merely a glitch in the system, it may be the system speaking in its own voice. This is why his thought can feel almost like recognition. He says aloud something many people already suspect in private, that our satisfactions often interrupt striving without curing it. Once that suspicion is granted, ordinary consolation begins to thin. Moderation sounds too mild. Better habits sound too managerial. Positive attitude sounds almost insulting. If willing is this deep, then no rearrangement of objects could possibly solve the problem at its source. The mind might secure better conditions, but it would still remain inside the same basic architecture. The latest success would be only the latest mask worn by the same engine. Yet even here Schopenhauer is not merely trying to depress us, he is trying to make our condition intelligible. There is a form of relief in seeing that personal dissatisfaction is not always a private moral failure. To feel recurrence is not necessarily to be shallow. It may be to discover something harsh and general about being alive under desire's rule. The severity hurts, but it also clarifies. A person who sees that the engine remains an engine no longer has to keep pretending that the next object will deliver something impossible. That clarification has a moral consequence of its own. It can make a person less contemptuous toward themselves and others. If recurrence is structural, then not every restless life is simply silly or corrupt. Some of the most decent people are caught in the same wheel because the wheel is not built out of cheap taste alone. Schopenhauer does not comfort, he does something harder. He removes the flattering fantasy that we would be fully settled if only we were a bit wiser, purer, or luckier. That loss of flattery is part of why his thought still cuts. Still, Schopenhauer's diagnosis becomes sharpest, where attainment should have proved him wrong. If striving were painful only in frustration, then fulfillment would offer a counterexample. Instead, he insists that fulfillment carries its own exposure. When desire falls temporarily quiet, another discomfort waits. That discomfort is boredom, and it shows why for Schopenhauer even success cannot quite justify the structure of willing that produced it. Most of us assume that desire has a bright side and a dark side. The dark side is frustration, delay, failure, deprivation. The bright side is attainment. Schopenhauer disturbs that picture by asking whether attainment may expose a second kind of wound. If striving hurts because one lacks what one wants, then relief should feel like peace. But sometimes relief does something stranger. It removes urgency, and in removing urgency it reveals how much of the self had been propped up by pursuit. Once the object is secured, a vacancy appears where purpose had briefly been concentrated. The result is not calm in the richer sense, it is boredom. Boredom, in this philosophical sense, is not merely bad entertainment. It is not a complaint about having nothing to watch or nowhere to go. It is the nakedness of a life that has lost one pressure without finding deeper rest. A person pushes hard toward a goal. The goal organizes days, justifies effort, gives shape to sacrifice, lends sharpness to identity. Then the goal is reached or withdrawn, and a strange flatness settles over things. The world is no longer resistant in the same way, but neither is it full. Something has ended, nothing final has been resolved. That is why the aftertaste of success can be so revealing. One expects relief and receives it, yet the relief is quickly joined by a quieter unease. Now what? What fills the space once the striving that gave life form has fallen silent? A person discovers that they were not only desiring the object, they were also depending on the process of reaching for it to structure their days, their self-concern, even their sense of movement. When the process stops, the object alone cannot justify the whole emotional architecture that had grown around it. Schopenhauer's famous oscillation between want and boredom is easy to turn into a quote card cynicism. It becomes more useful when heard as a structural clue. Frustration hurts because we are driven toward what we do not have. Boredom hurts because when the drive pauses, we discover how little peace there is in mere cessation. The mind does not know what to do with stillness because its whole rhythm has been shaped by longing. In one condition it burns, in the other it goes dim. Neither counts as freedom. Seen this way, boredom is not the opposite of desire. It is one of desire's exposures. It shows that a life built around pursuit may remain dependent on pursuit even when pursuit is exhausting. That is why some people rush back into new goals almost immediately after reaching old ones. The next striving does not merely promise a better object, it promises rescue from the flatness opened by completion. The person becomes loyal to motion because motion keeps them from meeting the emptiness underneath it. The pattern can show up in gentle and respectable forms as well. A person finishes caring for one long emergency and suddenly feels lost without the emergency. Someone finally earns the recognition they have chased for years and discovers that they miss the sharpness of the chase more than they enjoy the prize. Another person enters the relationship they dreamed about and finds themselves manufacturing new tests because calm feels strangely thin. In each case, boredom is not laziness. It is the revelation that urgency had been carrying more existential weight than anyone admitted. That is also why endless novelty is such a weak answer to boredom. Novelty can restart stimulation, but it usually does so by putting the machinery of pursuit back to work. New entertainment, new projects, new admirers, new possessions, new frictions. Each can briefly disguise the vacancy by giving the mind another surface on which to lean. Schopenhauer's point is that distraction is not freedom. A life can be busy all day and still remain trapped in the same oscillation between tension and flatness, because what it has regained is movement, not rest. In that sense, boredom can be philosophically merciful. It tells the truth that excitement keeps postponing. It shows that the soul was not hungry only for the object it named, but for the shape that pursuit gave to time. Once that truth appears, the next task can no longer be only to find a fresher object. The harder task is to ask whether a life can bear stillness without immediately turning stillness into another emergency to solve. Schopenhauer thinks that question is devastating because ordinary desire almost never teaches us how to answer it without reaching again. This does not mean that all projects are worthless or that every fulfilled aim ends in disenchantment. That would be melodrama. There are forms of work, love, craft, friendship, and contemplation that do not collapse so easily. The question is not whether life ever contains meaningful continuity. The question is what fulfillment reveals when it fails to quiet the deeper movement of wanting. Schopenhauer asks us to notice that some of our most intense pursuits end not in final peace, but in an exposed readiness for the next demand. Boredom names that exposure. The consequence is severe. If both lack and attainment can leave us unsettled, then desire cannot be redeemed simply by better luck. The ordinary hope says, once I reach the object, the pain will end. Schopenhauer says, once you reach the object, one pain may end, but another may step forward, because the structure that made you depend on striving has not been transformed. This is why his thought keeps leaning toward more drastic forms of release than moderation or success. Aesthetic experience, compassion, and finally ascetic denial of the will begin to matter in his ethics because ordinary satisfaction looks incapable of delivering freedom. If willing is the disease, then feeding willing cannot cure it. Even its fulfilled states remain implicated. In aesthetic contemplation, there is at least a temporary suspension of ordinary willing. In compassion, there is some loosening of egoistic insistence. In asceticism, most radically, there is a movement toward refusing the whole tyranny of desire. Whether one accepts that movement or not, one has to feel its pressure. It is a real philosophical consequence of his diagnosis, not a decorative flourish. That sequence also prevents a lazy reading of Schopenhauer as merely gloomy. He is tracing a path, however forbidding one, from diagnosis to attempted release. Art matters because in contemplation the object is no longer immediately being used to feed the next appetite. Compassion matters because another creature's suffering interrupts the little kingdom of personal willing. Asceticism matters because it is the most radical imaginable refusal of the cycle. One may resist the end point and still see the coherence. If desire is the engine of unrest, then any credible freedom has to involve more than better fuel. From outside, that consequence can look anti-life. It threatens ordinary ambition, eros, and attachment. It seems to ask whether every affirmation of life is secretly another concession to the wheel. Schopenhauer's importance here is that he forces the question before anyone has answered it. If striving is endless and relief opens into boredom, then ordinary hopes about fulfillment start looking naive. One can reject his endpoint and still feel the challenge he leaves on the table. Why trust desire if even satisfaction cannot justify it? The power of this challenge is that it does not depend on dramatic tragedy. It can be seen in quieter scenes. Someone finishes a long-sought project and immediately begins scanning for the next worthy labor. Someone secures what they thought would calm them and instead begins fearing its loss. Someone leaves a competitive struggle only to discover that without the struggle they feel strangely vacant. The boredom that follows is not proof that the object was worthless. It is proof that striving had colonized more of the self than the person understood. Schopenhauer's darkness gains its grip there. He makes the ordinary rhythm of wanting look less like a temporary imbalance and more like a condition. Yet the next philosophical move matters because Epicurus refuses to treat all desire as one undifferentiated trap. He asks a more discriminating question. If some wanting enslaves and some settles, then the work is not simply to condemn desire, it is to distinguish kinds of desire carefully enough to know which of them can actually reach enough. Epicurus enters this landscape almost like a calm interruption. After Schopenhauer, one can begin to hear every desire as one more proof of captivity. Epicurus refuses that flattening. He does not deny that human beings are easily disturbed by what they want. He does not deny that some desires have no obvious terminus. What he denies is that all desire belongs to one class. This matters because once every want is treated as structurally identical, the only remaining options appear to be indulgence or suppression. Epicurus breaks that false choice by sorting desires according to what they are and how they end. In the letter to Menoeceus and related Epicurean teaching, desires are distinguished as natural and empty, and within the natural class some are necessary while others are natural without being necessary. That distinction can sound dry until it is returned to life. Thirst, food, shelter, freedom from bodily agony, friendship, basic security. The conditions under which the body and soul are not continually distressed. These belong to a different region from the desire for prestige, ornamental luxury, social triumph, limitless display, or forms of excess with no stable measure. The point is not austerity for its own sake. The point is that some wants can come to rest, while others create dependence that renews itself. This is the first serious philosophical answer to Schopenhauer's flattening. If desire seems endless, perhaps that is because we have failed to distinguish the desires that have a natural limit from those that do not. Hunger can be satisfied. Vanity has no such internal boundary. Thirst can end. Social comparison does not know how to stop because its object is not a finite need but a moving relation to others. Friendship can stabilize a life. Spectacle keeps asking for witnesses tomorrow. Enoughness, in this view, is not a vague moral glow. It is a real difference in the structure of wants. That difference changes how peace is imagined. If a desire is natural and necessary, meeting it does not necessarily deepen disturbance. It may reduce disturbance. Epicurus does not think peace requires hatred of pleasure. On the contrary, pleasure matters profoundly. But the highest pleasure is not endless stimulation. It is a condition of being free from acute pain and turmoil, a settled ease in which the body is not tormented and the soul is not constantly agitated. Under that standard, many celebrated desires begin to look suspicious because they do not calm life. They recruit life into further upkeep. This is one of Epicurus's great strengths. He takes enoughness out of the region of vague spiritual language and gives it conceptual form. Some desires can be fulfilled in a way that leaves a person freer, less beholden to contingency, less anxious about acquisition. Others train a person into more dependence by multiplying what must be secured before peace is permitted. The contrast is not between pleasure and morality. It is between liberating pleasures and enslaving dependencies. Friendship becomes central here for exactly that reason. Epicurus does not picture the good life as a lonely body with its appetite managed down to almost nothing. He sees human companionship, trust, and shared ease as part of what actually lets desire come to rest. That matters because it shows how badly he is misunderstood when he is turned into a mascot for private comfort. The point is not to retreat from life into a padded corner. The point is to learn which relations deepen tranquility and which relations feed endless comparison. There is nothing cozy or simplistic about that. Epicurus is often domesticated into a mascot for simple living, as though he were merely advising tasteful moderation and good bread in a garden. That misses the philosophical force. The distinction among desires is part of a theory of freedom. A life is less free when its peace depends on goods that are unstable, comparative, and difficult to satisfy. A life is more free when it learns which wants are genuinely tied to bodily life and tranquility, and which are socially inflated demands that expose the self to needless agitation. Notice how humane this is compared to moralistic preaching. Epicurus does not begin by accusing the person who wants too much of being wicked. He begins by asking what kind of desire it is. Is this a want that nature can actually finish, or is it one that remains permanently open because it was never aimed at a natural sufficiency? That question alone changes the emotional tone. It allows criticism without contempt. It treats confusion about desire as an intellectual and existential problem, rather than a failure of purity. It also makes prudence more important than heroic renunciation. Epicurus is not asking the soul to prove its strength by dramatic self-denial. He is asking it to become intelligent about consequences, which once leave the body calmer, which once leave the mind easier to shake, which pleasures conclude in ease, and which carry a debt forward into tomorrow. Prudence, in that sense, is not timid bookkeeping. It is the practical art of discovering whether a desire closes or whether it recruits life into endless maintenance. That practical intelligence matters especially when a desire feels glamorous. Glamour is one of the main ways empty wants disguise themselves. They appear refined, elevated, impressive, or sophisticated. Necessary desires can look embarrassingly plain by comparison. Water, sleep, a trustworthy friend, enough food, enough shelter, enough bodily ease, enough freedom from fear. Epicurus keeps returning to those plain goods because they expose how much confusion is created when the soul starts despising what actually settles it and idolizing what keeps it agitated. Enoughness often looks modest before it feels profound. Fear also changes under this lens. Many people chase excess because they secretly distrust sufficiency. The modest good feels too exposed, too ordinary, too easy to lose. Spectacle feels safer because it looks stronger. Epicurus reverses that intuition. The simpler and more natural the desire, the less the soul has to gamble on luck, display, and unstable comparison. Security does not come from enlarging every want until it can dominate the horizon. It comes from learning how little is actually required before life can stop bargaining with itself for permission to be at ease. This is why Epicurean simplicity should not be confused with bleakness. A life organized around necessary desires is not a life stripped bare of flavor. It is a life in which flavor is no longer purchased at the cost of chronic agitation. Bread tastes different when it is not being judged against prestige. Conversation feels different when it is not being measured for status. Rest feels different when it does not have to apologize for lacking spectacle. Epicurus is not asking us to choose the dull over the vivid. He is asking whether vividness has been falsely monopolized by the very desires that keep the mind least able to enjoy what it has. At the same time, Epicurus is not sentimental. He knows that empty desires can feel urgent. The person chasing them may not experience them as optional ornaments. Status can feel like security. Prestige can feel like proof of existence. Luxury can feel like a buffer against vulnerability. Comparative victory can feel like the only visible form of dignity in a competitive world. Epicurus's point is not that such desires are weak. His point is that they have no clean measure of sufficiency. They intensify dependence precisely because they cannot tell the soul when enough has arrived. Here the contrast with Schopenhauer becomes sharp without becoming absolute. Schopenhauer says willing is structurally endless. Epicurus replies that some endlessness belongs to our failure to distinguish kinds of want. Schopenhauer looks at recurrence and hears the voice of the will itself. Epicurus looks at recurrence and asks whether the desire in question is one that nature could ever have closed. In that difference there is a real disagreement about the human condition. One sees striving everywhere. The other sees many desires as malformed because they refuse their natural limit. Still, Epicurus does not solve everything. One can understand the distinction perfectly and remain enslaved to the empty class. That is why the next step is necessary. A person can know a desire has no natural endpoint and still feel it gripping the self. Classification clarifies the field. It does not fully explain why some wants become woven into identity. Buddhist thought enters there, asking how craving binds itself not only to objects but to the very story of who one must become. Epicurus's category of empty desire becomes most vivid when we notice that some wants do not fail because we are weak. They fail because they were never built to stop. Their structure is comparative, theatrical, or fantastical from the beginning. The person living inside them keeps waiting for closure from a form of wanting that cannot generate closure by its own terms. That is why these desires can intensify the more successfully they are fed. Every fulfillment supplies evidence that the ladder is real, and every rung acquired reveals the next rung more clearly. Status is a clean example, though not the only one. To want standing among others is not automatically trivial. Human beings are social. Recognition matters. Humiliation can wound deeply. But once desire becomes organized around superiority, prestige, or comparative visibility, its endpoint begins to slide away. The moment one position is reached, another becomes visible. The relief lasts only while comparison remains favorable, which means relief is now tied to conditions one cannot fully stabilize. An empty desire of this kind does not quiet the soul. It trains the soul to scan the field for rivals. Luxury can work similarly. The issue is not that beauty or comfort are evil. The issue is that certain forms of acquisition have no internal standard of enough. When a want is animated by display, by distinction, by the need for objects to certify a self-image, then each attainment becomes part of a public language that can always be extended. The object is no longer serving bodily ease. It is serving a drama of signification. Under those conditions, the pleasure attached to acquisition becomes restless because the meaning of the object depends on a changing social horizon. Epicurus helps here because he makes the horizon itself part of the diagnosis. A natural and necessary desire points to something finite. The body needs food, rest, shelter. Friendship has its own richness, but it is not measured by endless escalation of spectacle. Empty desire, by contrast, depends on excess, comparison, fantasy, or vanity. It borrows urgency from social arrangements that have no natural finish. That is why one can become richer, more visible, more admired, and still feel no closer to enough. The desire was asking for a sign that could not stabilize. The same pattern appears outside obvious wealth or prestige. Romance can be turned into an empty desire when the other person is made to serve as permanent proof of one's worth. Knowledge can become empty when accumulation matters more than understanding. Moral life can become empty when virtue is pursued as visible superiority. Even simplicity can become empty when it is used as a stage for self-congratulation. Empty desire is not tied to one lifestyle. It is tied to forms of wanting whose logic keeps outrunning satisfaction. What matters most is the shape of the horizon. In a finite desire, attainment changes the situation in a way that can genuinely settle it. In an empty desire, attainment only reveals the next comparison more clearly. The prize is won, but now it must be defended. The rank is reached, but now someone else can surpass it. The image is polished, but now it has to be maintained. The soul is not merely enjoying the good, it is entering a contract with instability. That is why these desires produce vigilance as often as pleasure. This helps explain why escalation often feels built into certain pursuits. A person receives praise and finds that the praise is thinner than imagined. The answer the mind suggests is not to question the structure but to increase the amount. More praise, a larger public, a stronger credential. The thing desired is treated like a dosage problem. Yet the real issue lies elsewhere. The desire has no natural point of completion because what it seeks is indefinite recognition, indefinite insulation from shame, indefinite elevation over others, indefinite confirmation that the self has become unassailable. No finite event can close that request. Here Epicurus preserves a crucial contrast with both scolding moralism and modern self-help. He is not merely saying that social ambition is bad, he is saying that some desires destabilize the soul by placing peace in relation to goods that cannot tell us when to stop. This is a structural criticism, not a sermon. It also keeps him from becoming an anti-pleasure thinker. The problem is not delight. The problem is dependence on forms of delight whose upkeep widens the field of disturbance. One can see the physical cost in ordinary life. A person chasing an empty desire does not only experience hunger before attainment, they experience maintenance after attainment. The mind keeps checking the rank, the image, the narrative, the comparative standing. Pleasure becomes surveillance. Every gain carries a new burden of preservation. Under that regime, success does not reduce vulnerability. It multiplies the surfaces on which vulnerability can be felt. The soul becomes easier to shake because it has attached itself to ever more fragile signs. This is where the contrast with necessary desire grows almost tender. Water, when thirsty, leaves the body in a different relation to itself than prestige leaves the ego in relation to the crowd. Shelter answers exposure differently than ornamental excess answers vanity. Friendship can deepen quiet differently than applause deepens appetite. Epicurus is teaching not a generic dislike of wanting, but a finer ear for the way different wants end. Some conclude in relief, some conclude in renewed dependence, some never conclude at all. The distinction becomes morally useful the moment a person begins asking of each desire, what will this require me to keep doing once I have it? Some goods ask for care and gratitude, others ask for constant theatre. Some ask for maintenance measured by ordinary life. Others ask for endless defense against rivals, decline, boredom, and shame. Empty desire is dangerous not only because it lacks an endpoint. It is dangerous because even its temporary victories recruit the soul into long service. A person who wins by its terms rarely gets to rest by its terms. One sign of an empty desire is that it keeps translating every success into comparison. If the work is praised, then the next question becomes who was praised more? If the home is beautiful, the next question becomes who noticed? If the life is simple, the next question becomes who is purer, freer, more tasteful, more admirable in their restraint. The object keeps being reabsorbed into a ranking. That is why Epicurus is not simply warning against greed. He is warning against a structure of valuation that cannot enjoy good without placing it inside a ladder. Once that ladder becomes normal, language itself starts changing. Satisfaction stops meaning relief and starts meaning superiority. Enough stops meaning sufficiency and starts meaning being ahead. Pleasure stops being something inhabitable and starts being evidence in a contest. The person may appear successful by every external measure and still feel constantly under review because the desire they serve has turned life into scoreboard logic. Epicurus's criticism is sharp because it says this is not an accidental side effect. It is what empty desire naturally does when it is allowed to set the terms. That scoreboard logic can even colonize virtues that should have resisted it. Someone becomes generous in public and secretly checks whether their generosity is admired enough. Someone learns deeply and turns knowledge into display. Someone renounces luxury and turns renunciation into a badge. Empty desire is clever because it does not insist on one fixed object. It can recruit almost any practice once comparison becomes the hidden standard. Epicurus matters because he keeps returning to the simple question comparison hates. When, by the nature of this desire itself, could it honestly be said to be enough? If no answer can be given, the soul is already being trained for dependence. Still, even this clarity leaves a harder mystery. Many people know, at least dimly, that a desire is empty and continue serving it. They can say that the praise never satisfies, that the comparative ladder has no top, that the display requires perpetual maintenance, and yet the desire remains powerful. Something more than classification is at work. The desire has intertwined itself with the self. Buddhist accounts of craving begin precisely there. They ask what happens when wanting is no longer merely aimed outward, but woven into identity, becoming, and the language of mind. Buddhist thought deepens the conversation by widening what counts as desire's problem. In everyday speech, craving often sounds like intense appetite, mostly for pleasures or possessions. Early Buddhist sources name something more extensive. In the first discourse on the Four Noble Truths, suffering includes not getting what one wants. The origin of suffering is craving. Yet craving is not only sensual appetite. It includes craving for becoming and craving for non-being. In other words, the issue is not limited to wanting pleasant objects. It reaches into the way a self tries to secure, intensify, preserve, or even erase itself. This is a difficult turn because it asks us to hear desire in places where it does not look like greed at first glance. A person may crave not only pleasure, but a more legitimate identity. They may want the promotion, the recognition, the relationship, not simply for its surface benefits, but because it promises a different self on the other side of attainment. When this happens, I will finally count. When this arrives, my life will stop feeling provisional. When this recognition is mine, the old shame will lose jurisdiction. The object is real. The self-story wrapped around it is doing additional work. Buddhist analysis becomes powerful here because it links craving to clinging and ignorance. Craving reaches, clinging grips, ignorance misperceives. We take what is unstable to be stabilizing, what is changing to be keepable, what is impersonal or contingent to be arranged around a durable I and mine. Under those conditions, desire does more than pursue goods. It helps fabricate a fragile self that must constantly defend the things through which it recognizes itself. That fragility explains why frustrated desire can feel like more than frustration. When the desired object is entangled with identity, its loss or delay is felt as damage to the self. The pain is not only, I did not get what I wanted. It becomes, the person I was trying to become has been denied. The wound deepens because craving was carrying selfhood. A refusal is now heard as exclusion from legitimacy. A loss is heard as proof that one's place in the world was never secure. Clinging makes desire brittle because it asks the world to support a more stable self than the world can support. This is one reason Buddhist thought cannot be reduced to want nothing. The problem is not merely quantity. A modest, austere, apparently disciplined person may still cling ferociously to identity, to image, to spiritual attainment, to control, to reputation for purity. Craving can hide inside restraint as easily as inside luxury. One can be attached to renunciation. One can be attached to detachment. One can crave disappearance, mastery, holiness, invulnerability. The field is wider than appetite. That is why the Buddhist distinction between craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, and craving for non-being matters so much. Some people want more and more experience. Others want a more triumphant self. Others want to escape humiliation, dependence, or finitude by imagining some final erasure. These can look like opposite psychologies on the surface. Buddhism hears a family resemblance among them. In each case, desire is trying to solve the instability of selfhood by arranging conditions around it. The self may dream of expansion or disappearance. The compulsion to secure itself is still doing the work. That wideness matters for another reason. It blocks the comforting idea that suffering begins only when obvious excess begins. A life may appear modest and still be governed by craving, because the self is using events, relationships, and ideals to harden the distinction between what is mine and what threatens to undo me. Buddhist thought keeps returning to this relation between desire and appropriation. Experience is not left to arise and pass. It is seized, translated, claimed, defended. My success, my failure, my future, my humiliation, my peace, my path. Each grasp strengthens the sense that the self must be secured through the arrangement of conditions. This also clarifies why not getting what one wants belongs so centrally to suffering. If desire were only a surface preference, its frustration would sting and pass. When craving has become self-making, frustration tears at the architecture of identity. The person does not simply miss the object, they experience destabilization. They had outsourced legitimacy to a changing world, and the world has failed to keep the contract. Dukkha, in this light, is not only pain in the crude sense. It is the stress built into clinging to what cannot bear the weight of possession and self-definition. Buddhist thought is often misheard as saying that the answer is indifference, blankness, or some hatred of feeling itself. That is too crude. The critique is aimed at grasping, at the insistence that changing conditions secure a self, at the claim that experience must deliver permanence to what is inherently impermanent. Care is not the same as clinging. Love is not the same as possession. Action is not the same as compulsive becoming. The problem lies in the tightening, the appropriation, the insistence that what passes must remain because the self has staked itself there. This makes desire more intimate and more dangerous at once. It is not only that we want things, it is that we build selves through wanting them. We imagine a more complete version of who we are if they arrive. We imagine a damaged version of who we are if they do not. Craving weaves itself into the story. The self becomes more vivid through that story, but also more vulnerable. It gains contour and loses ease. It feels solid and grows fragile simultaneously. This is also why Buddhist discipline cannot be reduced to lifestyle simplification. One may remove many outward temptations and still preserve the inward machinery of appropriation. A monk can cling to purity. A parent can cling to sacrifice. A thinker can cling to insight. A wounded person can cling to injury because it has become part of the self's continuity. The teaching stays sharp precisely because it follows craving into those quieter rooms. It keeps asking not only what is wanted, but what self is being fortified by wanting it. Seen that way, craving and shame often belong to the same structure. A person reaches toward the object because they imagine a more bearable identity on the other side of it. Then if the object fails or disappears, shame rushes in because the desired future self never arrived. The pain is doubled. One suffers the loss itself, and one suffers the return of the self one was trying to escape. Buddhist thought is useful here because it does not treat that doubling as melodrama. It treats it as evidence that craving had become self-construction. No wonder the wound feels larger than the event. Craving for non-being reveals the same mechanism from the opposite side. Sometimes the wish is not to become more, but to disappear from exposure, from shame, from limitation, from dependence. One wants oblivion, numbness, anonymity, or some final subtraction of the vulnerable self. Buddhism hears in that impulse not the end of craving, but another expression of it. The self is still being treated as a project to be secured, only now through erasure instead of enlargement. That is why the analysis remains so piercing. Even the wish to escape desire can become one more desire if it still imagines salvation through a rearranged self. Now the emphasis shifts. Schopenhauer said striving is deep. Epicurus said desires differ in kind. Buddhism adds that even well-classified desire may remain enslaving if clinging and self-making stay intact. A person can learn that empty desires have no natural end and still organize their whole identity around a modest desire that must be theirs. The problem is no longer only what is wanted, it is how wanting has entered the grammar of selfhood. Once craving is tied to clinging, the instability of satisfaction looks different. It is no longer merely that one object gives way to another, though that remains true. The harder point is that clinging asks changing conditions to provide stable reassurance. Enjoyment is then shadowed from the inside. Even while something good is present, fear begins working. How long will this last? What if it changes? What if it leaves? What if I am no longer the person who could keep it? Under those conditions, pleasure starts carrying surveillance within itself. That is why satisfaction can feel thin even at the moment it appears richest. The thing is present, and already the mind is guarding it. The embrace is happening, and already the thought of loss enters. The recognition is public, and already the possibility of decline begins to irritate the edge of it. The peace is real for a moment, but it has been recruited into a project of preservation that cannot succeed. Clinging wants permanence from what is impermanent. It wants identity from what is changing. It wants proof from what is contingent. This is a demand reality cannot honor. Here, Buddhist insight differs subtly from Schopenhauer's severity. Schopenhauer hears endless striving and concludes that willing itself is the deeper torment. Buddhist thought hears craving and sees ignorance in the grip. The issue is not only that desire renews itself. The issue is that the mind misreads the nature of what it clings to. It asks lasting satisfaction from conditions that are constituted by change. It asks mine forever from relationships, bodies, reputations, moods, successes, and even spiritual states that cannot remain fixed enough to satisfy the demand. The result is not merely disappointment after the fact, the result is instability during enjoyment itself. This helps explain a common sorrow. A person can be happiest when something beautiful arrives and yet feel a quiet panic because they know it can pass. The very intensity of enjoyment turns into evidence of fragility. Instead of deepening rest, delight becomes another site of guarding. One begins preserving memory, managing the scene, searching for assurance, fearing interruption. The condition desired has not failed yet. The craving around it has already disturbed it. Satisfaction cannot hold because possession begins eating it from within. Impermanence is not a decorative doctrine here. It is the edge against which craving keeps cutting itself. Everything being leaned on for permanent reassurance is changing while it is being enjoyed. Bodies age while being loved, careers shift while being celebrated, children grow while being protected, moods pass while being clutched. Even spiritual clarity flickers. Buddhist thought does not introduce impermanence to make life sound tragic for its own sake. It introduces it to show why grasping is structurally mismatched to the world it is trying to master. If this sounds harsh, it is because it is. Buddhist thought does not flatter our ordinary relation to pleasure. It says, with unusual patience, that clinging contaminates experience by asking it to secure what experience cannot secure. Yet this is not a condemnation of love, art, food, beauty, or friendship. It is a criticism of the possessive relation that turns them into guarantees. To care deeply is one thing. To demand that what is cared for remains stable enough to support a permanent self is another. That second demand is where suffering thickens. This is also where release from craving can be badly misunderstood. If the issue is clinging, then the loosening of clinging may sound like numbness. If I stop insisting that this pleasure remain, does that mean I no longer care? If I stop trying to build identity through what I love, does that mean I love less? Buddhist thought answers by distinguishing release from indifference. The cessation of craving is not a sterile hatred of life. It is release from the rule by which experience must continually secure the self. Motion can remain, attention can remain, compassion can remain. What weakens is the compulsive claim of ownership. That is also why cessation has to be heard as a boundary rather than a slogan. Buddhism is not promising a prettier version of possession. It is pointing toward a relation in which experience is no longer forced to guarantee a lasting self. The aim is not to make moments permanent. The aim is to stop asking them to do that impossible job. Once that is understood, release sounds less like emptiness and more like freedom from a demand that had already been poisoning enjoyment from within. This has consequences for grief as well as pleasure. When something loved is lost, Buddhist thought does not ask the person to become a stone. It asks whether grief must also become a metaphysical verdict, proof that life can no longer be meaningful because what was cherished was taken away. That is where clinging and care divide most painfully. Care can remain faithful to what mattered. Clinging keeps trying to reverse impermanence by force of sorrow. Satisfaction cannot hold, and grief cannot heal, so long as reality is still being ordered to return what it never promised to keep. There is also a subtler disturbance that appears before loss becomes explicit. A person begins editing the present because they are already preparing for its disappearance. Instead of inhabiting the friendship, they archive it. Instead of hearing the music, they worry about the last time they will hear it this way. Instead of resting in the earned peace, they keep checking whether peace is still there. Craving deforms attention by making every good answer to a future court. Satisfaction cannot hold partly because the present is never allowed to remain present. It is turned into collateral for later reassurance. That is why the relation between Buddhism and Schopenhauer is so interesting. Both diagnose desire with real severity. Both refuse the shallow hope that more acquisition will settle the matter. Yet their trajectories are not identical. Schopenhauer often sounds as though life itself, in its willing structure, drives toward torment and can only be deeply answered by negation. Buddhist thought focuses more on craving and ignorance, on clinging and misperception, on the mind's appropriation of changing conditions. The difference matters. One risks condemning life as such. The other concentrates on the relation through which life becomes suffering. For ordinary experience, the distinction can be felt this way. Under a Schopenhauerian mood, the recurrence of wanting suggests that life is driven by a force that cannot be satisfied. Under a Buddhist mood, the same recurrence suggests that the mind keeps turning changeable things into sites of appropriation and then wondering why peace will not remain. The emotional tones differ, yet both strip the innocence from satisfaction. Neither allows attainment to count as simple rescue. Memory and anticipation show the mechanism clearly. A person remembers some beautiful hour and suffers because it cannot be preserved. Or they anticipate the next good and begin living in imagined possession before the thing has even arrived. In both directions, craving refuses the ordinary temporality of experience. It wants the past to remain available and the future to arrive already secured. Buddhist thought hears in that refusal the same old claim of ownership. Time itself is being asked to obey desire, and suffering widens because time does not obey. This is one reason modern comfort language can be so misleading here. If one turns Buddhist insight into vague calm, the sharpness disappears. The point is not to tell the soul to relax. The point is to expose the demand for permanence operating inside desire. Calm that refuses this exposure becomes cosmetic. What is being challenged is more serious. The habit by which wanting recruits the world to stabilize the self, then suffers because the world cannot obey. Once that habit is visible, the next philosophical question takes a new form. Perhaps desire does not enslave us only because we cling. Perhaps it enslaves us also because we crown certain externals as ultimate goods. Stoicism enters there. It does not begin by analyzing craving through selfhood in the Buddhist way. It begins by asking a harder question about valuation. What have we decided is truly good, and what suffering follows when changing externals are handed that authority? Stoicism is often caricatured as a doctrine of emotional shutdown. That caricature survives because the Stoics make a severe claim. Virtue alone is good in the strict sense. Vice alone is bad. Everything else belongs to the class of indifference. If heard carelessly, the claim sounds almost inhuman. Health, friendship, safety, wealth, reputation, love, home, political security, bodily ease, all of this merely indifferent. Yet the Stoics are not saying these things do not matter at all. They are saying they do not determine whether a life is good in the deepest sense. That distinction may sound abstract until one notices how often suffering grows by handing externals the whole burden of flourishing. A person tells themselves that without recognition they cannot count. Without health they cannot live meaningfully. Without status they cannot bear themselves. Without another person's continued presence they are existentially ruined. Stoicism hears in those claims an enormous surrender of authority. The changing world has been asked to decide the worth of a life. Restlessness follows because externals are unstable, vulnerable to chance, and never fully under our command. This does not mean the Stoics are naive about pain. Illness hurts, poverty hurts, loss hurts, injustice hurts. To call externals indifferent is not to deny their practical weight. It is to deny that they are the source of moral worth or the final criterion of flourishing. One can be injured by their loss without allowing their loss to define the good entirely. The distinction is demanding because it asks for a separation many of us instinctively resist. We want the things we love and rely on to be more than preferred conditions. We want them to certify that life has gone rightly. That is where desire's authority grows dangerous. To want something is one thing, to grant it sovereignty is another. Stoicism concentrates on this second step. The deepest wound may not be wanting externals as such. The deepest wound may be treating externals as if they had the right to rule the whole soul. Once a person believes that some changing condition is necessary for a life to count, then rest depends on weather, markets, praise, bodies, institutions, timing, and the decisions of others. Peace is outsourced to what cannot be fully governed. The category of indifference sounds cold because the modern ear hears indifferent as emotionally empty or dismissive. For the Stoics, it means something more exact. These things are not good or bad in the ultimate moral sense, though many of them are worth selecting. Their value is conditional, instrumental, relational. They can fit a life well without becoming the source of its worth. When that ranking is lost, desire hardens into servitude. Every external success becomes a necessity. Every external threat becomes metaphysical panic. One reason this sounds alien is that modern language often treats value and possession as nearly inseparable. If something matters, we assume its presence must be decisive for flourishing. The Stoics refuse that fusion. Something may matter a great deal without becoming the final judge of a life. That is what makes their position both difficult and liberating. It creates room for devotion without deification. A person may work for health, justice, friendship, and civic stability, while still denying that the absence of these things automatically destroys the whole possibility of living well. This is one reason Stoic thought can feel both severe and humane at the same time. It refuses to flatter our dependencies, yet it also refuses to tell us that human life must become deadened. Health may be worth preferring. Friendship may be worth cherishing. Political freedom may be worth defending. Material stability may be worth seeking. The issue is not whether one acts. The issue is whether action kneels before outcomes. Stoicism wants pursuit without worship. Seen from the angle of desire, this is a profound reordering. Schopenhauer heard endless striving. Epicurus distinguished finite from empty wants. Buddhism exposed clinging and self-making. Stoicism asks what happens when desire crowns its objects as final judges. The answer is familiar enough. Anxiety expands, loss becomes totalized, hope becomes dependence, success becomes fragile because its status as good is inflated beyond what any external could sustain. The soul is governed not only by what it wants, but by the ranking it has assigned to what it wants. That ranking also clarifies why Stoicism differs from the gentler advice to stop caring. The Stoics are not asking for apathy, they are asking for discrimination in value. A person may care deeply and still refuse to make the beloved object the foundation of their entire good. They may work seriously and still refuse to let success decide whether they are living well. They may fear loss and still not concede that loss has the right to annihilate their moral center. This is difficult, perhaps often beyond us, but it is not the same as numbness. There is an immediate objection. Severe deprivation and political domination are not trivial merely because they are external. Stoic language can seem almost cruel if it is used to wave away structural harms. A careful reading must preserve that boundary. Externals matter enormously in lived life. The Stoic point is not that poverty is nothing, or illness is nothing, or social injury is nothing. The point is that none of these things by themselves determine whether the soul has become vicious or whether right judgment has vanished. It is a claim about ultimate value, not a dismissal of suffering. That boundary helps explain why Stoicism could speak to both Epicurus, the former slave, and Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, without making their conditions equivalent. Their external situations were radically unequal. Stoic ethics did not erase that fact. What it claimed was that moral worth and right use of experience could not be reduced to those externals alone. That is a severe idea, but it is not a denial of political or bodily reality. It is a refusal to let reality outside the soul become the sole court of meaning. It also clarifies why virtue alone counts as good in the strict sense. Virtue is not a decorative moral bonus added to a life already made worthwhile by success. It is the activity of judging, choosing, and acting well amid unstable conditions. That is why the Stoics place so much weight on it. Everything else may help or hinder. Virtue is what determines whether the soul is using help and hindrance nobly or badly. Once that is heard, desire looks less innocent. It is not only asking for things, it is constantly proposing false rankings of what matters most. That is why Stoicism remains a philosophy of action rather than retreat. If virtue is the good, then externals still matter as the field in which virtue has to operate. One still owes things to family, city, friends, and strangers. One still has roles to fulfill, injustices to resist, duties to meet. The point is not to float above circumstance. The point is to meet circumstance without surrendering the whole measure of the good to what circumstance happens to do. In that sense, Stoicism is not anti-worldly, it is anti-subjection. This means the Stoic question is not, do I want anything, but what part of me is obeying this want? If desire is asking me to act with courage, loyalty, or generosity, it may fit a life well. If it is asking me to become a servant to reputation, luck, or praise, then something false has entered the ranking. Stoicism does not abolish preference, it interrogates allegiance. What has been granted the right to command panic? What has been granted the right to declare life successful or ruined? Those are Stoic questions because they reach beneath the object into the politics of the soul. Once that is heard, desire becomes newly legible. We suffer not only because we fail to get what we want, and not only because we cling to it, but also because we treat certain externals as ultimate goods. Peace and panic follow their rise and fall. Stoicism wants to break that sovereignty. It prepares the way for a form of desire that can still prefer and pursue without handing over the throne. The humane side of Stoicism appears most clearly in the doctrine of preferred indifference. This is the distinction that keeps Stoicism from collapsing into lifeless severity. Health is preferable to sickness. Friendship is preferable to isolation. Material sufficiency is preferable to destitution. Good repute is often preferable to disgrace. Political peace is preferable to civil collapse. None of this needs to be denied. The point is that these are preferred without being treated as the final good. One can want them sincerely without making them the ruler of one's whole life. This sounds admirable in theory and nearly impossible in practice, which is precisely why the Stoics place so much emphasis on impressions and assent. An appearance arrives. This is terrible, this is necessary. Without this I am ruined, with this I will finally be secure. For Epicurus, the appearance is not yet the verdict. Between the event and the inward collapse there is the act of assent, the acceptance of the claim that the appearance is authoritative. Stoic work begins there. It asks whether desire has already granted an external object the status of necessity for flourishing. That emphasis on assent makes the doctrine more practical than it first appears. Stoicism is not waiting for a future saint who never feels the first wave of alarm. It is addressing the ordinary interval in which a human being is tempted to turn an appearance into a decree. This setback proves I am nothing. This praise proves I finally count. This relationship must survive or life becomes unlivable. In those small sentences, the whole politics of desire is taking place. The Stoic intervention is simple to describe and difficult to achieve. Notice the claim before swearing loyalty to it. Again, this is not easy reframing or cheerful denial. A person may lose something precious and feel the full force of grief. Stoicism does not demand that feeling vanish on command. What it refuses is the further claim that because an external has been harmed, the whole good of life has therefore been extinguished. That refusal creates space for a difficult human possibility: disappointment without metaphysical surrender, desire without slavery, preference without worship. The distinction matters because many of our strongest desires come wrapped in the language of ultimacy. We do not merely prefer success. We feel we must have it to count. We do not merely prefer the continuation of some bond. We feel that without it, the self becomes null. We do not merely prefer health. We imagine illness as the definitive collapse of all worth. Some of these reactions are understandable. Stoicism does not mock them. It asks whether they hand too much authority to what can be lost. This makes internal ranking the hardest part of the work. A person can say aloud that virtue matters more than status, while inwardly organizing every day around status. They can call wealth indifferent while using wealth as a measure of safety and worth. They can speak nobly about friendship while turning friendship into a demand that no loneliness ever return. The soul's hierarchy reveals itself under pressure. Stoicism is less concerned with declarations than with what desire obeys when threatened or enticed. That is why impressions matter so much. Before a desire becomes full panic, it often arrives as a proposal. You need this. You cannot be at peace without that. Once you have this outcome, your life will finally make sense. The Stoic does not deny that the proposal is persuasive. The work is to hear it as a proposal rather than a command. That small difference changes the field. Desire may still move toward the object. It no longer speaks with the full voice of destiny. Marcus Aurelius returns to this discipline repeatedly in a more public key. Court life, war, praise, insult, illness, and exhaustion all keep presenting themselves as if they were entitled to define the whole day. His writing keeps trying to reduce those appearances to their true size, not because they are unreal, but because their first presentation is often swollen. Stoic practice, therefore, becomes a form of proportion. Bring the event close enough to see it clearly, but not so close that it occupies the entire horizon of value. That proportional discipline can sound modest until a serious loss arrives. Then its difficulty becomes obvious. A reputation collapses, a body fails, a trusted person leaves. The mind immediately reaches for total language, ruined, finished, impossible, unbearable. Stoicism does not deny the blow. It contests the total language. It asks whether the event has altered every layer of the good, or whether it has injured something preferred while leaving the possibility of courage, justice, honesty, and steadiness intact. In that distinction, preference stops turning automatically into doom. This is one reason Stoic training includes a kind of moral rehearsal. Not rehearsal in the sense of enjoying catastrophe in advance, but in the sense of remembering that loss is built into the world of externals before loss arrives. The point is not pessimism. The point is to weaken the surprise by which desire keeps acting as though every preferred thing came with an unwritten guarantee. Once the mind stops treating preference as promise, it becomes a little less likely to collapse when preference is denied. The same discipline also protects gratitude. If I treat every preferred good as if it were guaranteed, I will greet it as an entitlement and lose it as a scandal. If I remember that it is preferred but not owed, then its presence can be received more honestly, and its loss, while painful, does not have to masquerade as cosmic betrayal. Stoicism can sound stern because it withholds guarantees, yet that refusal of guarantee is also what keeps love, health, friendship, and success from becoming idols that punish us for treating them as gods. One can hear the tenderness hidden inside that severity. To treat a person, a body, or a public honor as if it were guaranteed is not only philosophically mistaken, it is unfair to the thing itself. It asks a finite good to bear divine weight. Stoic restraint frees the object from that impossible burden. Friendship can be friendship instead of salvation. Health can be a blessing instead of a metaphysical certificate. Work can be honorable labor instead of the one tribunal before which the self must justify its existence. Preference without final authority is difficult, precisely because it preserves love while refusing worship, and that combination is far harder than either cold detachment or blind dependence. There is something dignified in this, and also something deeply demanding. Stoicism does not promise that the body will stop recoiling from loss or straining toward comfort. It does not imagine a person who no longer prefers love to abandonment or stability to chaos. What it asks is whether preference can remain preference instead of becoming sovereignty. Can one seek health without making health the god of the soul? Can one value public honor without turning dishonor into total doom? Can one grieve the loss of what is loved without deciding that life itself has therefore lost every standard of goodness? This is where Stoicism presses back against Schopenhauer in a distinct way. Schopenhauer suspects that willing as such binds us to endless unrest. The Stoic replies that active life need not equal captivity if our rankings are corrected. Action itself is not the issue. The issue is whether action has handed its meaning to externals. One may still build, love, govern, struggle, teach, work, serve, and prefer, all while refusing to let outcomes decide the whole worth of existence. Whether human beings can do this consistently is another matter. But the possibility matters. It also distinguishes Stoicism from Buddhism. Buddhism concentrates on clinging, on appropriation, on the self-making demand within craving. Stoicism concentrates on judgment and value. Both reduce slavery to desire, yet they diagnose different mechanisms. One loosens the possessive grip, the other reorders the hierarchy of goods. These are not the same medicine, even if they sometimes soothe related pains. By this point, 4 models are in play. Schopenhauer suspects desire from the root. Epicurus educates desire by classifying its kinds. Buddhism releases clinging and the self-binding of craving. Stoicism dethrones externals through a correction of value. They all distrust a life ruled by wanting. They do not agree on what freedom from that rule would require. It is tempting, once several traditions start criticizing desire, to force them into a single shared wisdom. That temptation should be resisted. Agreement on the symptom does not mean agreement on the structure. 4 physicians may all say a person is unwell while disagreeing sharply about which organ is failing. Something similar happens here. Schopenhauer, Epicurus, Buddhist thought, and Stoicism all recognize restlessness, dependence, and the instability of satisfaction. Yet they do not prescribe one common cure in different accents. Their disagreement is part of the truth. For Schopenhauer, the deepest trouble lies in willing itself. Desire does not merely misfire occasionally. It belongs to a structure of blind striving, whose satisfactions are temporary, and whose pauses expose boredom. Freedom, under this pressure, begins to look like some weakening or negation of the will, not its improved management. Ordinary success cannot count as solution because success remains inside the same wheel. Even when one recoils from his severity, one has to admit that he has identified a powerful suspicion. Perhaps striving itself keeps us unfree. Epicurus does not share that level of suspicion toward all desire. He sees confusion rather than universal condemnation as the main trouble. Some desires are natural and necessary. Some are natural without being necessary. Some are empty. Freedom, in his framework, requires intelligence about the kinds of wants one serves. The soul is not liberated by hating desire in general. It is liberated by refusing the desires that cannot end and by learning the modest, finite conditions under which tranquility becomes possible. Enoughness is therefore not the death of wanting, it is the education of wanting. Buddhist thought shifts the issue again. The root problem is craving joined to clinging and ignorance. Desire enslaves because the mind appropriates experience, seeks becoming, fears non-being, and organizes changing conditions around I and mine. Freedom, then, is neither indulgence nor merely better classification. It is release from craving's rule, from the compulsion to secure selfhood through grasping. This can resemble Schopenhauer's distrust in mood, yet the mechanisms are different. Buddhism is not saying that life as such is a blind will to be denied. It is saying that suffering is deepened by craving and misperception, by possessive insistence on permanence and identity. Stoicism reopens the field from another direction. Perhaps desire becomes tyrannical because externals have been granted final authority. We suffer when health, rank, reputation, possession, or even affection are treated as ultimate goods rather than preferred conditions. Freedom does not require the extinction of desire. It requires the dethroning of externals and the discipline of assent. One can still act, prefer, pursue, and choose. The question is whether outcomes have been crowned as sovereign. These differences matter because each model of freedom asks the human being to pay a different price. Schopenhauer asks for a suspicion so radical that ordinary willing itself begins to look guilty. Epicurus asks for discrimination and limit, for the courage to stop serving desires that have no natural measure. Buddhism asks for a loosening of clinging so deep that even the self's demand for reinforcement begins to soften. Stoicism asks for inner hierarchy, a refusal to let what can be lost govern the meaning of a life. None of these demands is small, none collapses into the slogan "want less." The disagreements become even clearer if we ask one simple question: what would a freer life still contain? Schopenhauer is the most severe. Freedom leans toward quieting willing, perhaps through compassion, aesthetic contemplation, and ascetic denial. Epicurus imagines a life of friendship, simple pleasure, bodily sufficiency, and mental tranquility. Buddhism imagines disciplined attention, compassion, and liberation from craving's compulsion, without reducing life to blankness. Stoicism imagines active engagement in the world under a reordered system of value. These are different worlds, not one. The contrast becomes vivid in one ordinary scene. Imagine a person who wants to be admired for their work. Schopenhauer hears the wheel of striving turning again, another case in which confirmation briefly quiets the will, only to leave it hungry once more. Epicurus asks whether admiration is serving some finite social need, or whether it has become an empty appetite for rank with no natural stopping point. Buddhism asks what self is trying to become real through applause, and why neglect feels like damage to being itself. Stoicism asks whether esteem has quietly been promoted from a preference into a sovereign good. The same desire stands there, but the diagnostic light changes with each tradition. There is also disagreement about what remains tragic. Schopenhauer sees striving itself as a fundamental torment. Epicurus allows the possibility that enoughness can be real under the right classification of desire. Buddhism says suffering is intensified by craving and ignorance, which means release is tied to a transformed relation rather than only to external simplification. Stoicism grants that externals wound us but refuses to let them define the moral good. Each of these positions preserves a different residue of pain and a different residue of hope. One can feel why modern commentary often flattens them. A simplified map is easier to sell. Schopenhauer becomes life is suffering. Epicurus becomes live simply. Buddhism becomes let go. Stoicism becomes do not care. but the simplification destroys the genuine philosophical work. Schopenhauer is not offering a mood. Epicurus is not offering tasteful minimalism. Buddhism is not offering wellness calm. Stoicism is not offering emotional shutdown. Each tradition is answering a different account of why desire rules us and what it would mean to stop obeying so completely. The most honest way to receive them is not to extract one easy consensus, but to let the disagreement sharpen our own understanding. Maybe desire itself is more suspect than we usually admit. Maybe some desires are cleanly finite and others structurally endless. Maybe craving hurts most when it is woven into the self. Maybe the deepest error lies in treating externals as ultimate goods. The traditions do not resolve these tensions for us, they intensify them. That intensification is valuable because it forces a more exact question. We do not simply want freedom from discomfort. We want freedom from being ruled by wanting. But what counts as rule? Is it the endless recurrence Schopenhauer saw? Is it the service of empty desires Epicurus exposed? Is it the clinging self of Buddhist thought? Is it the surrender of value to externals described by the Stoics? A full answer may need all these pressures without pretending they say the same thing. The objection that now appears is serious. Suppose desire loses its authority. Suppose striving is quieted. Empty wants are refused. Clinging softens. Externals are dethroned. What kind of life remains? Would peace then feel wiser, or would it merely feel smaller? That fear is one reason desire keeps the throne so effectively. It persuades us that without its restlessness, very little would still be alive. Love makes the disagreement even more vivid. Schopenhauer can sound merciless about erotic striving, seeing in it one of the clearest demonstrations that the individual is driven by forces larger than individual happiness. Epicurus would ask whether love has become a source of companionship and stable pleasure, or an endless theatre of vanity, insecurity, and status. Buddhist thought would ask where care ends and clinging begins, where tenderness becomes possession, where the beloved is being asked to secure a self that fears its own instability. Stoicism would ask whether another person's presence has been given the power to determine the whole good of life. None of these positions abolishes love, yet each changes what it would mean to love without servitude. The disagreements are therefore not cold theory. They reach directly into the most intimate arrangements of ordinary life. This is why the search for a universal recipe often weakens rather than strengthens insight. We want a sentence simple enough to govern all cases. Desire is suffering. Desire needs education. Desire needs observation. Desire needs restraint. Each sentence captures something and betrays something. The world does not become easier because philosophy is made tidy. It becomes easier only in the shallow sense in which a map with fewer details is easier to read. A serious guide to desire has to keep the terrain uneven. It has to admit that one kind of wanting may need finite satisfaction, another demotion, another release, another deep suspicion. The demand for one answer is itself often one more desire for closure. This objection deserves more respect than it usually receives. Many criticisms of desire sound persuasive until they seem to threaten vitality itself. If wanting loosens, what happens to eros, ambition, invention, attachment, aspiration, movement? If restlessness is reduced, does aliveness thin with it? People often defend desire because they sense correctly that much of what feels vivid in life arrives through longing, striving, pursuit, romance, labor, unfinishedness. To criticize desire can therefore sound like a disguised invitation into a flatter world. Schopenhauer is the thinker who makes this fear hardest to dismiss. If willing is the wound, and negation of willing is the deepest release, then one naturally wonders whether release asks too much of life. Does it turn the ordinary loves and projects through which human beings move into lesser forms of bondage? Does peace become meaningful only by sacrificing the very energies that make a life recognizably human? Schopenhauer is often caricatured as hating life. The truth is subtler and more difficult. He sees too clearly how striving torments us to trust it easily again. But the price of that distrust can indeed look anti-life. Epicurus offers the most approachable resistance to this fear. He does not define enoughness as emptiness. He defines it through satisfaction of natural and necessary desires and the reduction of needless disturbance. Friendship, conversation, memory, bodily ease, modest pleasure, freedom from terror. These are not a shrunken life. They are forms of lived sufficiency. Epicurus therefore shows that less ruled desire need not mean less life in every sense. It may mean a life less dependent on escalation. The objection remains, but it loses some of its force. Enoughness can be positive rather than merely subtractive. Buddhist thought resists the deadness reading differently. Release from craving is not release from care. It is release from grasping, from the insistence that experience continually secure and stabilize the self. Compassion does not vanish. Attention does not vanish. Ethical action does not vanish. What weakens is the compulsive demand that every valued thing remain mine and remain permanent. This matters because the fear of deadness often confuses possession with aliveness. It assumes that intensity requires ownership, that love requires clinging, that meaning requires self-protection. Buddhist thought challenges that confusion directly. Stoicism gives another answer. A person can still prefer, choose, labor, serve, defend, and commit, while refusing to deify outcomes. The active life remains intact. What changes is the authority assigned to externals. This is why the doctrine of preferred indifference is so important. Without it, Stoicism would sound like a recommendation to become inert. With it, Stoicism says something harder and more interesting. You may care deeply without letting care become servitude. You may desire sincerely without making desire sovereign. Still, the fear should not be brushed aside. There are genuine forms of renunciation that seem to drain color from life. There are people whose refusal of desire curdles into defensiveness, timidity, or covert resentment. There are disciplines that make the soul smaller while claiming to free it. To admit this is not to refute philosophy, it is to preserve honesty. The question is not whether any reduction of desire is good. The question is whether being ruled by desire is the same thing as being alive. In ordinary experience, the two are often confused because lack produces momentum. A person in love feels vivid because longing intensifies perception. A person in ambition feels vivid because desire sharpens time. A person in fear feels vivid because what is wanted and what is threatened both become bright. There is real fire there, but fire is not the same as freedom. Something can energize a life while also keeping it unstable. Restlessness can feel like proof of seriousness while making peace impossible. The force of desire is not evidence that it deserves to govern. That distinction may be one of the most important outcomes of the whole conversation. Desire animates. No serious philosophy here denies that. The issue is whether animation requires enthronement. Must the self remain under the rule of longing in order to love, build, think, or care? Schopenhauer doubts the innocence of striving. Epicurus says some desires can end well. Buddhism says aliveness need not be fused with clinging. Stoicism says activity can remain while sovereignty shifts inward. Together they make it possible to imagine movement without enslavement, even if none of them turns that possibility into something easy. There is another reason the objection persists. Desire often tells us who we are. A person without their main ambition, main attachment, main grievance, or main hope may feel briefly hollow. If peace loosens those structures, what identity remains? The anxiety is understandable. A self has been organized around its longings. To reduce their authority can feel like losing contour. Yet perhaps some of that contour was prison bars traced from the inside. The loss of ruled desire may feel smaller at first, because the old drama supplied constant urgency. The smaller feeling may be withdrawal from compulsion rather than diminishment of life. Even so, philosophy should not pretend that the matter is simple. Some forms of peace do become evasions. Some refusals of desire conceal fear of disappointment. Some detached postures are merely exhausted selves pretending to be wise. That is one reason this objection must remain alive. The answer cannot be a glib assurance that all criticism of desire preserves every intensity worth keeping. The traditions themselves disagree too much for that. The strongest conclusion is therefore modest and sharp. The aim is not deadness. The aim is not to prove that passion was always a mistake. The aim is to ask whether desire can lose the right to define enough without life losing everything vivid. Epicurus suggests yes, through finite satisfactions. Buddhism suggests yes through release from grasping. Stoicism suggests yes through reordered value. Schopenhauer remains the hardest voice, reminding us how deep striving runs and how easily we romanticize it. The fear that peace would feel smaller is real. It may also be one of the reasons unrest continues to rule more of life than it should. There is also a creative side to this question. Many people secretly think their best work depends on unease. The next page will be written only if self-doubt keeps burning. The relationship will be cherished only if fear keeps it vivid. The child will be protected only if anxiety never sleeps. The body will be maintained only if shame stays nearby. Sometimes unrest does energize a life, but it often energizes by threat, not by freedom. A philosophy of enough asks whether the same devotion could survive with less panic attached to it. That is a frightening possibility precisely because so much of identity has been trained to confuse alarm with seriousness. Play makes the point in a gentler register. A musician, a child, a craftsperson, a friend at ease in conversation can become intensely alive without being ruled by the fantasy of final possession. Attention deepens, energy gathers, care becomes sharp, and yet the whole experience is not organized as a desperate hunt for permanent self-confirmation. These moments matter because they suggest that vividness and domination by desire are not identical. Life may have forms of intensity that are diminished, not enriched, when every good is forced to justify the self completely. Art, friendship, study, and parenthood all help complicate the objection in useful ways. None of them requires flatness, yet none of them is best served by unruled desire. Friendship is richer when it is not permanently scanning for proof of devotion. Study is richer when it is not wholly driven by prestige. Care for a child is richer when vigilance does not become the fantasy of total control. Art is richer when it does not need a claim to certify its existence at every step. In each case there is intensity, labor, and vulnerability. There is also a possibility of relation that is not simply governed by acquisition. That possibility does not refute the fear of deadness entirely. It does show that life contains forms of vividness that are damaged rather than strengthened when desire is given absolute authority. The fear that less domination by wanting would mean less life may arise because domination has been confused with animation for so long. At the beginning, the scene was simple. Something was wanted. It arrived. Relief came briefly. Then the mind began leaning again. By now, that small scene has become much less innocent. We can hear several layers inside it at once. Schopenhauer hears striving renewing itself. Epicurus asks what kind of desire was being served and whether it had a natural end. Buddhist thought asks how craving and clinging were turning the event into a support for selfhood. Stoicism asks what authority had been granted to the object and whether the soul had handed its sovereignty. The same little aftertaste now carries a whole philosophy of unrest. That does not leave us with one final posture toward desire, it leaves us with a more exact one. Schopenhauer prevents us from romanticizing longing. He leaves open the deepest wound, the suspicion that willing itself keeps life restless beyond what any object can cure. We need that severity because without it we are tempted to call every dissatisfaction a trivial failure of discipline and every hope for satisfaction a harmless dream. Schopenhauer shows how often the structure goes deeper. Epicurus prevents that severity from flattening all desire into guilt. He preserves a real category of finite peace. Some wants can be fulfilled without perpetuating endless dependency. Some pleasures reduce disturbance rather than widen it. Some forms of enoughness are not fantasies. That matters because otherwise the critique of desire risks becoming contempt for ordinary human need. Epicurus teaches that not every hunger belongs to the same household, and not every satisfaction is a disguised trap. Buddhist thought prevents even Epicurean clarity from becoming too external. A person can sort desires intelligently and still cling. They can simplify life and still organize every experience around self-protection, permanence, and possession. Craving hurts most deeply where it says mine, where becoming and identity wrap themselves around changing conditions. This means enoughness is not only about having less or choosing better, it is also about loosening the compulsive claim that the self must be secured through what it wants. Stoicism prevents the whole discussion from drifting into anti-life suspicion alone. One may still pursue, prefer, and act. The question is whether outcomes have been made into the measure of the good. Externals need not be despised to lose their sovereignty. This is a difficult possibility, but it is an important one. It suggests that desire can remain in a human life without being allowed to dictate what a life is worth. Taken together, these traditions do not give one recipe. They give a changed authority structure. That may be the most honest way to speak about enough. Enough is not a magical state in which desire disappears forever. It is not a possession secured once and then protected. It is not a final immunity from loss, comparison, recurrence, or fear. Enough is closer to a different relation between the self and its wants. Desires may still arise, goods may still be pursued, love may still wound, work may still matter, but wanting loses some of its right to decide reality. This means the familiar self-help question starts to feel too small. How do I stop wanting? Is usually asked as though wanting itself were an annoying bad habit. The traditions tonight have shown a larger problem. The deeper issue is not merely how to suppress desire. It is how not to let desire govern the meaning of peace, the worth of the self, and the measure of enough. That is a harder question, but also a truer one. It also preserves the unresolved part honestly. None of these traditions removes the human condition like a stain. Schopenhauer does not hand us cheerful acceptance. Epicurus does not guarantee that every empty desire will lose its glamour once classified. Buddhism does not promise that clinging will dissolve just because it has been understood. Stoicism does not make loss painless or externals easy to rank correctly. No one here offers a permanent cure in the therapeutic sense. The reward is not certainty. The reward is sharper sight. Sharper sight may be less comforting than slogans, but it is also less degrading. It does not reduce the problem to greed. It does not reduce wisdom to wanting nothing. It does not reduce peace to numbness. It does not reduce philosophy to tricks for becoming unbothered. Instead, it leaves us with a more serious possibility. Desire can remain part of life without remaining its unquestioned ruler. Enough can become thinkable, even if final rest never becomes secure. There is a quiet dignity in that. A person need not pretend they are above wanting. They need not deny how much love, fear, hope, work, and longing still move them. They may remain vulnerable. They may remain unfinished. What changes is not the existence of desire, but the throne it occupies. The mind no longer has to believe every promised desire attaches to its latest object. It no longer has to treat each external condition as the final court of worth. It no longer has to confuse animation with obedience. When the wanted thing next arrives and the old leaning begins to return, the moment may still sting. But it need not mean the same thing. It need not mean that gratitude is impossible, or that life is a fraud, or that one must train oneself into deadness. It may simply reveal that desire has resumed speaking in its familiar voice, asking again to define enough. Philosophy does not silence that voice once and for all. It teaches us how to hear it with less innocence and less submission. It may also allow a more patient relation to incompleteness. Many people secretly believe that if restlessness returns, then the preceding joy must have been false. That conclusion is too harsh. A pleasure can be real and still fail to settle a life. A love can be real and still be joined by fear. A success can be real and still leave one unfinished. The point is not to deny the good because the good was not total. The point is to stop demanding totality from goods that are finite, changing, and vulnerable. Once that demand softens, Enoughness becomes less like a final state and more like a discipline of proportion. This desire matters. That does not mean it must govern everything. This loss hurts. That does not mean all worth has collapsed. This joy is precious. That does not mean it must be made permanent in order to count. In that sense, the closing question of the whole inquiry is not whether one can become free of desire in a pure and final form. The more honest question is whether desire can be made answerable. Can it be asked what it promises, what class it belongs to, what self it is building, what value it has enthroned, what kind of life it leaves behind once served? These are philosophical questions precisely because they do not reduce wanting to a bad habit. They treat desire as one of the chief ways a human life interprets itself. To change that interpretation, even slightly, is already to change the texture of the life. One practical sign of that change is that disappointment becomes more divisible. Instead of one heavy verdict, it starts to break into parts. The object was good. The hidden promise was too large. The self had leaned too hard on the object. The value of the object had swollen beyond its rightful scale. The wound is still real, but it is no longer an oracle. That kind of division does not make a person invulnerable. It does make desire less absolute. And when desire becomes less absolute, enough becomes easier to imagine without requiring a fantasy of perfect rest. Another sign is that success becomes more inhabitable. A person can let a good remain good without demanding that it become total. They can enjoy the friendship without asking it to answer every loneliness. They can take pride in the work without making it the sole witness to their worth. They can seek health without treating illness as proof that life has failed them. They can mourn what passes without deciding that only what lasts forever can count as real. Desire is still present in all of this. What changes is that desire no longer gets to speak as though it were the final philosopher of the life. The object from the beginning is still on the table. It arrived. It mattered. The room brightened for a little while. Then the mind began leaning again. Earlier, that might have felt like a private failure, ingratitude, weakness, proof that satisfaction never lasts because something is wrong with us. By now the scene sounds different. We can hear how much was hidden inside the wanting. We can hear the hope that this attainment would secure more than itself. We can hear the way desire tried to tell life what enough should mean. That is why so many philosophical traditions keep returning to desire. They are trying to understand why relief so often turns back into restlessness, why possession so often reopens lack, and why peace becomes fragile when wanting is allowed to define it. Schopenhauer hears endless striving. Epicurus hears the difference between finite and empty wants. Buddhist thought hears craving fastening itself to selfhood and change. Stoicism hears the soul crowning externals as goods they were never meant to be. Their disagreement should remain intact. Still, one thread runs through them all. Desire becomes dangerous when it governs more than action. When it tells us what reality must provide before life counts, when it turns every object into a carrier of final settlement. Once that happens, satisfaction becomes too small for what has been asked of it. So perhaps the real opposite of enough is not only poverty of possessions or intensity of appetite. Perhaps the opposite of enough is a life in which wanting keeps the right to decide what a life is worth. A person can own little and still be ruled by wanting. A person can own much and still never arrive. A person can reject luxury and still cling to purity, admiration, security, innocence, or control with the same old desperation. Enough, then, may not be a state one acquires and protects. That would only repeat the pattern. Enough may be closer to a loss of authority on desire's part. Wants arise, but they no longer automatically define the day. Goods are pursued, but they are not worshipped. Loss still hurts, but it no longer settles every question of worth. Philosophy does not erase vulnerability. What it can do is take away some of desire's innocence. That shift in authority is easy to describe and hard to inhabit, because desire is so good at sounding final. It presents its latest object as if the whole question of peace had been narrowed down to this one decision, this one gain, this one avoided loss. The philosophies we followed tonight keep widening the frame again. Schopenhauer asks what engine is speaking. Epicurus asks what class of want is making the demand. Buddhism asks what self is being built through the demand. Stoicism asks what status has been granted to the demanded thing. Those questions do not destroy desire, they interrupt its claim to be unquestionable. And that interruption matters in very ordinary moments. It matters when relief immediately turns into guarding. It matters when disappointment starts sounding like a verdict on the self. It matters when praise begins asking for more witnesses, when love begins asking for impossible guarantees, when fear begins calling itself prudence, when ambition begins speaking as though life cannot count without public proof. Enough rarely arrives as a feeling of total completion. More often it arrives as a refusal to let one more wave of wanting dictate the whole interpretation of reality. So if the room grows quiet tonight and some old wanting begins to stir again, perhaps the better question is not how to stop wanting forever, and not what new object will close the cycle for good. The better question may be simpler and harder. What authority am I giving this desire right now, and what would it mean for enough not depend entirely on its answer?